Hi everybody, I'm Sajid. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be the end of year book tag, which was a book tag that was created by Ariel Bisset a couple of years ago. To kind of just share sort of like what you plan on reading before the year comes to an end. I've actually been having a fairly good reading year by my standards. I've read 23 books for the year so far, and I am confident that I could read at least 15 to 20 more before the end of the year, especially given the fact that I have been reading a lot more than I usually do over the last 2 months. Excuse me, I have to turn on the AC because I thought that I could do this without any background noise, but it is too hot and I will begin to sweat very soon. Before that happens though, let's just get into the questions. So the first question is, are there any books that you've started this year that you need to finish? I'm in the middle of a few books, but I'll just talk about the ones that I am not reading for school. The first one here is Enter Ghost by Isabella Hammad. This one takes place in Haifa and it follows a Palestinian woman who grew up in the UK by the name of Sonia. She lives and breathes theatre, that is her bread and butter, and she goes to Haifa to visit her sister Haneen, who is living there. And while she's there, she ends up getting involved with a local Palestinian theatre group. They decide to go ahead and put on a show of Hamlet in the West Bank. Before I went into it, I assumed that the story would be kind of like about the obstacles that she has to endure as a Palestinian or as part of a Palestinian group in the acting space. But I'm about like 60, almost 70 pages in actually, and it has more so really been about her ruminating on a very complicated relationship with Palestine. We haven't really gotten to the part of the book that focuses on the play in the West Bank as yet. So far, we're kind of mostly jumping into flashbacks of her teenage years visiting Palestine. It's really just like no plot, just vibes so far. So I can't really say too much about it. I'm also about 40 pages into Sick Transit Wagon by Barbara Jenkins. This is a collection of short stories kind of, but they all seem to be intertwined. I've read 3 so far and it wasn't very clearly stated, but based on some details from each of the stories, they kind of seem to, thus far, I've only read 3 and there's like 16, they kind of all seem to be about the same character. These stories, I want to say, take place perhaps in the 50s or 60s in Trinidad, but either way, the stories are really just about how girlhood and so much of girlhood in Trinidad, especially at this time, is just defined by the circumstances around you. You just have to adapt to what the adults around you are doing and the circumstances that are affecting their lives and how those circumstances shape yours. The next question is, do you have an autumnal book to transition into the end of the year with? I usually like to flip this question on its head because I live in the tropics, so we don't really have autumn here. So I usually just like to recommend a local book, a Trinidadian book that I'd like to read before the year ends. Obviously, Sick Transit Wagon could go for this, but another one that I recently got that I am very excited and very intrigued to read is The Lost Love Songs of Boysie Singh by Ingrid Persaud. Now, I tried to read this author's debut novel, Love After Love, which was a smash hit when it came out like during the pandemic, and I couldn't really get into it, and so I was a little bit hesitant about this story until I heard what it was about. Apparently, even though it's a novel and it's fictional, it focuses on a character who's actually a real person, Boysie Singh. Boysie Singh was a Trinidadian serial killer from the 1940s, I believe, and I had never heard of this man before until this book came out. And so recently I went around and asked some of my older relatives if they have ever heard of this Boysie Singh, and they're like, yeah, Boysie Singh was like, you know, somebody that their parents used to talk about. And apparently there's a saying in Trinidad that like young Indian men who are like, I guess bad or rambunctious or rebellious, they refer to them as Boysie Singhs. And I was like, I've never heard anybody call anybody a Boysie Singh. So nobody ever called me a Boysie Singh.
I like to think of myself as more of a girlsy Singh.
Anyways, so all I know about this story is that it takes place from the perspective of 4 women who were all in relationships with Boysie. The next question is, are there any new releases that you are still waiting for? The short answer is no. However, I did order 2 books from a local indie bookstore that I am waiting for, and hopefully they get here before the end of the year. And I'm really excited for both of those books. One of them is not a new release. It's The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. If you watch my July wrap-up, you'd know that I'd read Azadi by the same author, which is a non-fiction book. I loved that book, and in that book she talks about both of her fiction novels, especially The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. And whilst I'd always heard of The Ministry of Utmost Happiness, I didn't know what it was about. And when she described what it was about in that book, I was like, okay, no, I have to read it. The story takes place around the context of the Gujarati massacre in the early 2000s, and it's following a Shia Muslim intersex Hijra named Anjum, who decides to set up a makeshift home in a Muslim graveyard that sort of welcomes people who are I guess, rejected by the wider society. And it's meant to be a commentary on the rise of the fascist right-wing Hindutva state in India, I suppose. That's all I know about it, or all I have gleaned from what I read in Azadi, and it just sounds fantastic and something that I will absolutely love. So I am really, really excited to get into this one. I also asked them for Hisham Matar's Not the Return, that's his other book. This one is called My Friends. I have no idea what this is about other than Eric from Lonesome Reader really likes it, and it is on the long list for the Booker Prize right now, and I usually like to read at least 2 books off of the long list. That's sort of my tradition every year. I would read more, but it's really hard to get your hands on all of these Booker Prize books because they are expensive, shipping is expensive, the local bookstores don't get them. Ebooks are ridiculously expensive, and while audiobooks are an option, half of them are not available in my country. You know what it is to have an Audible subscription and then you go on the app and you look for books and half of the books say not available in your country or region.
Fuck you.
Anyways, I don't know what this book is about, even though I've heard tons of people talk about it. It's one of those stories that I figure I should probably just dive into without knowing anything. The next question is, what 3 books do you want to read before the end of the year? So I have 3 fiction books here that I really, really want to read before the end of the year, and they are all books on Palestine. The first book is Salt Houses by Hala Alyan, which is interesting because earlier today I was watching a video from a booktuber who I recently subscribed to, blanking on the channel name, but I'm only newly subscribed to them, and they were talking about how they recently read the oldest book on their TBR, and I was thinking about, wait, what was the oldest book on my TBR? And I realized that it's probably this, because I think I bought this book the year that it came out, which was 2017. I've had this book on my shelves for 7 years, and I haven't read it as yet. Every other book that I bought in 17, I've either read or got rid of, or both. But for some reason, I still have this one, and you know what? It's time. It's time for me to finally get to her. I don't want this to go into an 8th year of being unread. The pages are already speckled and turning yellow and stuff, so it's time for me to delve into this one. This is a multi-generational story about a Palestinian family, and that's all I know about it, and honestly, that is all I need to know. I love multi-generational stories. They are some of my absolute favorite stories to read. In fact, one of my favorite multi-gen novels, which was also about a Palestinian family, was Mornings in Jenin by Susan Abulhawa, whose most recent novel, Against the Loveless Will, I borrowed out of the library recently. All I know about this one is that it's about a woman named Nahr who shares her life story from an Israeli solitary confinement cell. Sounds interesting, sounds intriguing, and if it is at least a fraction of what Mornings in Jenin was, I know that I will love it. I also recently got my hands on the ebook of You Exist Too Much by Zaina Arafat. Again, I don't know too much about this book, but I know that it's a queer read, and that's all I need to know, so I'm excited to give this one a try as well. The next question asks if there is any book that I think could surprise me and end up becoming my favorite of the year. So far, I would say my favorite book of the year would have to be probably A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. But I do feel like there are some titles that could come and definitely like overthrow that one. For example, The Ministry of Utmost Happiness is definitely a contender. But I also have that same author's other work of fiction, which is The God of Small Things. This won the Booker Prize in 1997, the year that I was born. Okay. And it is one that I've always wanted to read and I always keep putting off. And after I read Azadi, I was like, I need to prioritize reading Arundhati Roy's books, especially her only 2 fiction books. But yeah, this is about these twins in India, and I believe something traumatic happens to their family. They end up being separated, and it is the story of how they reunite or something like that. The next book I have really, really good feelings about being another contender is Disorientation by Elaine, Hsieh, Chou. This is a book that I had always sort of seen around. The cover had always been very intriguing to me. It was on I don't know what to call it. There's this genre of bookstagram specifically where the girlies read mostly literary fiction, especially like Japanese translated fiction and Donna Tartt and A Little Life, and like you know what I talk about. Them girlies, them was going crazy for this book a couple of years back when it was first published. So I saw it at the library, I saw the cover, I was like, wait, I know this one. I turned it around and I finally read the back of it to see what it was about, and it's about a grad student who is fed up with grad school and finally comes across like a piece of data that could finally help her finish her thesis, but then shit goes awry and she ends up in this big sort of like controversy explosive discovery upending her entire life and of those around her and whatnot. I was like, that is very relatable. Not the controversy and the upending the life and whatnot, but like grad school, really wants to finish, fed up of like academia. Hello, hi, excuse, nice to meet you. That's me. So I would very much like to read this, and I feel like I could possibly relate to it, or maybe I won't. I don't know. You know what I'm talking about, that genre of Instagram. I want to be them. Like, I want to be the one who's like, and you know, they always wearing like this sweater that goes all the way up to here, like the Ariana Grande thing, and they have like their nails, and they're like,
books that will like change your brain chemistry.
And then it's like this pile of books, and they're like doing this. Just showing you books. Half of it is just like Japanese translated fiction with cats on the cover. Ugh! Can that be me? The final question is, do you have any reading plans for next year? Or have you started thinking of your reading plans for next year? And I actually do have a TBR project, and I don't want to say what it is right now because it's a surprise. I'll give you a little hint. There's your hint, hun. There's your hint. Yeah. 2025. Okay, time to end this video. In the comments down below, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, if you have any thoughts on them. Also, subscribe to my channel, like my videos, comment on them, leave an emoji of a lotus, because this is a lotus. I don't know if this is a lotus, but it looks like a lotus, and there is a lotus emoji. I know this, because I've used it before. If you can't find it, just use a flower or anything. Just let me know you were here. Just be like, hey, I watched the whole video. Bitch. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely day, and until next time, inshallah. Oh my god, I'm such a heathen. Until next time, inshallah, keep reading. Oh my god, what is wrong with me?